Well, hello, and welcome to tonight's Loud and Proud. The Americans with Disabilities Act is a giant piece of legislation passed into law in 1990. But what does it actually do? And what was life like before it passed into law? What changes or additions would the community like to see in the future? Tonight, we are going to talk about all of that. So welcome to Loud and Proud, a show where we discuss important topics in the disability community. As always, thanks to Public House Media for providing us with this platform to have the show. I am your host, Nicole Kelly. I myself was born with only one hand, and I have spent the past few years of my life traveling and speaking at schools and universities across the country on the topic of disability. I have no idea what it's like to live in a world where my disability is protected. In fact, I was only 56 when in 1990, George Bush signed the Americans with Disabilities Act into law. 56 days old. I have no idea what that's like. So, do you yourself live with a disability? I want to know if you are someone who is watching who remembers life was like before this was passed into law. If so, just please comment below. Just say a simple, I remember. I want to be able to see you, and I want to know also, what is the biggest difference you have experienced pre the Americans with Disabilities versus post Americans with Disabilities? Secondly, do you know someone who lives with a physical disability? Someone like me, maybe who has one hand or maybe lives there. If you do, tag them in the comments below, as we would love for them to be a part of our conversation tonight. Now, as you are typing in the comments below, let's get on to my amazing guest. One of my favorite mentors. Tonight we have with us Mr. Adam Ballard. I'm going to read you quickly his bio. Adam Ballard is the manager of organizing and policy at Access Living here in Chicago, where I am. Adam Ballard manages community organizers and policy advocates working on various disability issues at Access Living. So at this time, let us please welcome Adam to our show. Here he comes. Hello, Adam. Welcome.
Hi, Nikki. How are you?
I'm so good. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. Can you first start out by telling us, you are indeed in Chicago, correct?
That's right. Yep.
Can you start by telling us what disability you live with and how kind of that has affected your growing up and where you are today?
Sure. So I have a physical disability. I use a power wheelchair full time for mobility. It was a condition that was present at birth. That it affects basically my joints and muscles, and that's why I use a power wheelchair to get around. I've always had limited mobility. I used to walk a little bit with really heavy leg braces for a while when I was younger, but it was dangerous for me to get around that way. So I switched to the power chair quite a while ago, and it's actually been it's been pretty liberatory to do that. It was really hard to walk, and it actually limited my ability to get into places more when I was walking. Now, because of the ADA and other advances, I can navigate the world pretty well in my wheelchair, and I'm grateful for that.
Amazing. Before we jump into ADA, can you also tell us a little bit about, I kind of gave the basis of saying that you work at Access Living, but can you tell us what Access Living does and what your role is there?
Yeah, absolutely. So Access Living is the Center for Independent Living in the city of Chicago. Centers for Independent Living, for folks who don't know, are agencies that are governed and staffed. So our board and our staff is made up of a majority of people with disabilities. And for us, our movement, the independent living movement, is cross disability. So it means that there's people with physical disabilities like myself, but there's also folks with sensory disabilities, so people who are blind or deaf, people with cognitive or developmental disabilities of different kinds. And the people we serve are definitely, come from a wide variety of disability backgrounds as well. So physical disability is, an important part of what we'll talk about today with the ADA, but it's not the whole story. And it's really important for us to build a movement where people with different kinds of disabilities are supporting each other as well. But as the manager of organizing and policy, I work in our advocacy department. Our advocacy department is the part of the organization that is kind of puts the word out about what changes have been made, but also what changes still need to be made to the way the world is. And, we specifically work in the areas of community organizing, which is just getting people together to use their power to make change. We believe that power comes from the people, it comes from the relationships among people, and we use that power to influence, lawmakers, other elected officials, other influential people in government, media, to change the way that they do business and to be more accommodating and welcoming to people with all kinds of disabilities. So in a nutshell, that's what I do. Again, as the manager of organizing policy, community organizing, and some of our policy work falls under my team's work.
I want to be you when I grow up. You're changing the world. You really are. Can you tell us then, at its very most basic level, what is the Americans with Disabilities Act?
Yeah, so the Americans with Disabilities Act is basically the major piece of civil rights legislation for people with disabilities. It gives us access to public life in a way that we didn't have before. It says that all public spaces must be made accessible to people with disabilities. It provides for accommodations in the workplace. I'm sure we'll revisit that topic during our conversation. It provides for communications access for people who do have difficulty communicating because of their disability, and it really enshrines in a powerful way, in a unique way, rights that had kind of been given to us piecemeal in the few decades prior to its passing through things like the Rehab Act, things like the amendments to the Fair Housing Act, which just a couple years before the ADA was passed was amended to include disability as a protected class for housing discrimination. So these things have started to come to us piecemeal, over the 60s, 70s, and 80s. But we needed that one piece of signature legislation that said that people with disabilities in America have the right to access the same range of opportunities that any other American does. When President George H.W. Bush signed the ADA at the White House in July of 1990, it was at the time, I think it might still be, but at the time for sure, it was the largest attendance at a bill signing ceremony ever at the White House. About 5,000 people showed up on the South Lawn to watch the president sign the bill. And one thing that the president said as he was signing the bill that stuck with our community ever since is, it's time for the shameful wall of exclusion to come tumbling down. So that's really what the ADA is. It's our legal right to be part of American society like everyone else, finally enshrined in law. And it's really important because of that.
Amazing. Do you remember life before the ADA? Do you remember things being different for you? And if so, what would that be?
A little bit. I was a little older than you were when the ADA passed. I was 9 years old. So I have some memories of life pre-ADA. And even in the first few years after the ADA, it took a while. I mean, still, again, we'll probably come back to this. A lot of places still aren't in compliance. But even in those first few years after the ADA, a lot of places, even public places that were subject to the law, hadn't come into compliance yet. So, I remember, and this still happens sometimes, but not nearly as often, being asked to take a service elevator or come in through the kitchen to get into a restaurant, being led through all these back passageways, dragged up and down the flights of stairs, because there wasn't access in the building for me. So architectural access is the biggest change that the ADA has brought so far. Again, public places have become much, much more physically accessible than they ever were. The fight continues to bring some smaller businesses into compliance. That's still an ongoing project, but definitely business access is much more as a whole better than it was before. But it has taken a long time. We're 27 years after the ADA is passing, and we're still not quite there, but we've made quite a bit of headway.
So then you started to mention some of the major changes there. I think for somebody who knows nothing about ADA, what you immediately think of, or I don't know why, this is what comes to my brain, is the like cuts in the sidewalk.
Mm-hmm.
As something as simple as that, or seems as simple as that, that makes a huge difference actually in access for others. I'm wondering, with all of these changes, although slowly happening and being made, where do we see the ADA lacking? Or where is there room for growth, or what is being focused on in the future to make room for more inclusion?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to talk about 2 or 3 things, and I'm kind of fold into our conversation things that have started but are not finished under the ADA, for instance, which I think gets to what you're asking about. So, for sure, things like curb cuts, accessible public transportation was also written into the ADA. So the reason that all public buses in Chicago and most every city now have ramps or lifts is because of the ADA. That was a fight that was begun way before the ADA, but it was completed by the ADA having that provision that all public transportation systems have to be accessible. So that curb cuts, accessible public transit are 2 victories that are mainly won, right? You still see a curb without a cut once in a while. You still, on old rail systems like Chicago's, you see inaccessible stations still. But, we're working on that. The CTA has made a commitment to bring all of their rail stations into complete accessibility, I think, in the next 20, 30 years. So, but again, on an old system like the CTA, it takes a lot of time and money to make that happen.
Yep.
So public transportation and just, I want to say, public ways, sidewalks, that's, that those fights are mainly won. The fights that are ongoing are 2, and I would break them down this way. So 1 is employment that we started to talk about. Tom Harkin, who is, someone both you and I admire a great deal. Senator Harkin from Iowa was the chief sponsor of the ADA when it was in Congress. And his personal interest in this is that he has a deaf brother. Senator Harkin recently retired, but still is highly involved in the disability community. He's been at events, still comes to disability events. I think I might see him in a couple weeks in Indianapolis, actually, at an event that I'm going to. But Senator, yeah. I'm so jealous. I'll tell him you said hi if I see him. But please. But Senator Harkin has said that the one major unfulfilled promise of the ADA is employment. The employment rate for people with disabilities hasn't really improved much at all from pre-ADA to post-ADA. A little bit, but not as much as we would have liked to have seen by now. So, getting the word out to employers that it's not only okay and feasible to hire people with disabilities and to accommodate us, because that's one of the concerns, right, is that, I'll have to pay so much just to accommodate this person, or they'll make my insurance so much more. Those things really aren't true in a meaningful way, but also people with disabilities bring just an amazing innovativeness and adaptability to the workforce, and that the workplaces that have really made hiring of people with disabilities a priority, they report that they're seeing tangible benefits beyond just doing the right thing. They're seeing better outputs and better outcomes from their workforce, and they can't imagine going back to not hiring people with disabilities. So again, that ball is rolling very slowly, but we're trying to get there. So employment is definitely one area that the ADA directly addresses that we haven't gotten to where we need to be. The other area is community integration. That can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, but what I mean when I talk about community integration is the right of people with disabilities to live in the community setting of their choice. So this actually isn't directly laid out in the ADA, but it comes out of a court decision that the Supreme Court handed down a decision 9 years after the ADA, where it used the ADA as its basis. So the Olmstead decision in 1999 said that it is the civil right of people with disabilities to live in the community, and they used the ADA as their basis for that. Again, some gains have been made there. There's fewer large institutions than there used to be. There are more community-based settings than there used to be. There are more options than there used to be, but there still aren't nearly enough. And there's still far too many people with disabilities of all kinds, psychiatric disabilities, physical disabilities, who are basically held against their will in nursing homes or other kinds of institutions because there aren't supports for them in the community. And that also directly ties into the ADA. So the fight for community integration and the fight for employment, I think, are the two ADA-based struggles that will continue as we go forward. Transportation, however, is interesting now that I think about it, because even though things like public transportation have been settled, with the advent of new communication technology like Uber and Lyft, we're seeing ADA implications there, because those are people's private vehicles that are being used largely, and they're not accessible. So that's another area of ADA-based advocacy that's opening up, is what do we do in the new world of on-demand, ride-sharing, maybe even eventually self-driving vehicles? How do we have all that subject to the ADA and accessible to all as well? That was a lot.
No, it was a lot. I am taking it all in. And you, yet again, this is why I wanted to talk about this topic with you, because you just have the most eloquent way of laying it out and sharing it and making it exciting. So hopefully others to understand as well. I guess you talked about so much in there, but my big question is action in talking about employment and in talking about integration into community. What is the next step? How do we take action? What are things that we can be doing to kind of start kicking these off? Or what is already happening that I don't know about and should?
Yeah, so I think things are happening. With employment, I think it's, how do I want to say this? Employment, there are definitely things happening that I'm excited about. So one of the other hats I wear besides being at Access Living is I'm also a member of the advisory committee for the Disabilities Fund at the Chicago Community Trust. For folks who don't know, either from outside of Chicago or maybe you're in Chicago and don't know, the Community Trust is the largest community-based philanthropic fund in the city. And just one of the largest funders in the city, period. But they, for a few years now, have had a dedicated fund. It's not huge, but it's a decent amount of money that is set aside just for building bridges between the disability community, the corporate world, the public sector, to try and address some of these big problems that we're talking about. So the Disabilities Fund is really honing in on employment as a big focus of our work right now. And one thing that we're trying, it's kind of in the early stages, it's a pilot program. Well, it's not even a program yet. We're still doing the research to see what emerges. We're really focusing in on how can we focus on high growth sectors like healthcare. Healthcare is a very high growth employment sector right now, right? There's a lot of jobs in healthcare, and they're not, most of them aren't even specialized jobs, right? Some of them are doctor nurse jobs, but a lot of them are just, maintenance service type jobs that anyone can do. How do we open those jobs up more to people with disabilities? And again, thinking beyond people with physical disabilities, how can we get young people with developmental disabilities or intellectual disabilities into those jobs? So, there's thinking happening along those lines, trying to connect those dots, I guess, and see where is there untapped potential and where is there opportunity to push into work that hasn't been done before. So that's just one specific example. I know that there's some other things happening in the corporate world that are interesting, but it's all still pretty small scale. And I think we're hoping that if enough of these things catch on and really gain momentum, it'll kind of create a wave effect. But people who are interested in taking more action, should look into what the ADA actually has to say about employment, about what it means to accommodate an employee with a disability, and especially for people who are in a position to make hiring decisions, step outside your comfort zone a little bit. Start interviewing candidates with disabilities and finding out what they actually bring to the table. That would be a huge step if we could get more hiring managers to make that commitment. Not even a commitment for greater hiring. Just make sure make sure you interview one qualified applicant with a disability for every open position you have. That would be a huge step forward. So those are some little things, you know. We can keep people posted as things move on if there are bigger efforts to join. As far as community integration, it's a little easier to do more boots on the ground style advocacy with that, because we're under huge threat right now with the many federal level attacks on Medicaid, Medicare, and other things that we think of as healthcare, and they are, but they're also like the support systems that make people's civil rights possible. Medicaid's not just a healthcare program, it's also what pays for the supports and services that keep people independent. So for us, it's not just an issue of healthcare, it's an issue of basic civil rights. So, you know, join in the work that Centers for Independent Living are doing. Find out more about ADAPT. ADAPT's been in the news a lot this summer. You know, being in Washington, shutting down some things, getting folks arrested, and you know, it all looks really intense, but it's important because it's life and death for people. So finding out what groups like ADAPT are up to and how you can join in their efforts, you know, calling legislators, senators, representatives, and saying, you know, please preserve these, whatever you're going to do with taxes or healthcare, please preserve these programs, because they're more than just healthcare. They're about civil rights for people with disabilities, and taking that message and making it clear is important. And I think we're really moving the ball in that area, but we need many more people to come alongside us and amplify that message.
I thank you for all the work that you are doing and all of the expertise that you bring to this. You are just an invaluable resource. To me specifically, I'm just so thankful that you're in my life. But to those out there who also are trying to learn, and I'm sure in what you do, it is your everyday. And I know that just like in our everyday lives, things maybe seem slow moving, but I just love the work I'm putting up right now. There you can find Access Living at, of course, their website, or there is their Twitter handle. You can find them there. That is, again, where Adam works and what he is up to. Again, if you're listening, I want to hear if you remember what life was like before the ADA went into effect, and what your life was like if you were someone living with a disability. How did it affect you when those changes started to happen? What can we work on? What are the things that we still really need to be working on? I want to hear from you, so go ahead and leave your comments again below, whether you are live or watching it later. That's totally fine. Adam, thank you so much tonight. I'm sure if you didn't have too miserable of a time, I will want to ask you back to come hang out and share your knowledge. Because yet again, that's just, you are such a wealth of knowledge. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on. And anytime you want to talk about this stuff on the show, I'm happy to come back.
You're the best. And seriously, if you do, I mean, I'm going to take you to coffee next week, but if you really are about to see Tom Harkin, we really need to make a game plan of how you can slide him my telephone number.
All right. Yeah.
I am very serious. For those of you who don't know my obsession with Tom Harkin, it's real and it's deep because he's from Iowa. And my favorite picture of all time is when I met him in DC. I don't know if you've seen this picture, Adam, but literally it was at the Smithsonian for the Americans with Disabilities 25th anniversary. And I'm shaking his hand, and I have never looked more in love with one person in my entire life than in this photo. It's all over my face. It's just, this man is everything. Anyway, enough Tom Harkin love there. Yet again, just thank you so much, Adam, and thank you again to Public House Media for allowing us, so that you subscribe so you know when this show is happening. It's every week at 8:30 that we are coming live to you with a different topic on disability, but so you're sure that you don't miss it. If you're subscribing to the page, you can get those reminders, and it's no big deal. You don't have to even remember. So go ahead and do that now. Thank you so much for joining. Please start a conversation below. I will be checking it. I will be responding. Adam, I'm sure you will as well, to what's happening. And yeah, just thank you so much for joining Loud and Proud, We will see you next week.
Thank you.